Nope, still don't have any kind of intro. I managed to get a whole bunch of these. I'm at the point now where I think I have 6 of these edited and uploaded. I've got one more ingested and ready to go for editing, which takes forever. Though it should take a whole lot less when it's down like this. So that person's letting me in. I'm going to wave them to say thank you and then not waste their time. Let's see. This might actually be a slightly better spot. It's a little up. I don't really like that it's looking up at me. I think that's kind of weird. I kind of want it to look directly at me. But when I do that, it ends up super close to my face, and I don't really want that either. So what's best? Yeah, it is. Okay. I was wondering if maybe there was like a white balance thing, and maybe there is, but since mostly I'm going to be illuminated by the brake lights of the people in front of me, that line on my face is from my windshield. It's from the rain. There's really no getting around that. Let's just put it right there so that it's right in the middle. Yeah. It's just slightly to the side. It's not a big deal. I had the camera mounted up a little bit higher last time than it is right now. And it was really close, and I felt like my face kind of filled the screen, and it was sort of weird. I didn't really want that to be the case. That looked kind of strange, and I wanted to make it look a little smaller. So moving it a little further back is good. I had one that was even further back than this and a little bit lower, and that was a problem too. Partially, it was really low, and that looks weird. Looking up into a beard is kind of strange. And the fact that it was really low meant that it ended up slightly behind the steering wheel, and that was difficult too. So here we are in our magical does this UPS truck want me? Oh, he's gonna let me. That's super kind of you, sir. Scholar and a gentleman. And these buses are like, you could reach out from the Greyhound here and tap that. That's crazy. It seems like it would be a terrifying place to sit. Oof. I am way behind on sending out holiday presents. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about, because that's personal life stuff, and I just feel like that's not what this show is all about. This show has lately been about my philosophies and my thoughts thereon. I'm going to follow up on the one that got cut short. Maybe I really need to watch that one to really get back into the flow of it. But there is a video much earlier, and I think it's episode 4. It might be 5. It's labeled Consequentialist Goblin Bard. That's 5. And it, that's a good number. And in it, so I start talking about consequentialism and how, quote, the ends justify the means is not really used in a way that I think is indicative of consequentialist ethics. The idea that the goal you're trying to get to justifies any actions you take along the road is not how I understand consequentialism, but that being how popular American culture defines it kind of helps explain something else about the way we do economics. Okay, if I do that, then it's on my mouth, and that's way weirder than it being on my eyes. Yeah, we'll just leave it on my eyes, and it'll just be weird. The way that American economics work is very similar to that glib ends justify the means style. And what I'm talking about is the economic idea of an externality, and I link to it in that video to I link to a definition of that so that people can look it up and figure out what it means and, you know, what they would do with that. But an externality is any cost or benefit or anything created by a transaction that is not accounted for in the ledgers of the parties to that transaction. So when you buy electricity from the power company, then the trade involved is power from the company in watts and money from you in dollars. And you pay so many dollars for so many watts delivered, and the company obviously pays so many dollars for watts to be generated and charges you for generated, for transmission, and a couple other things, and that's how transactions work. But there's an additional cost that's not reflected in the price of your power, and that is the cost of the air pollution caused by the power plant. And this is a thing, it happens, and you just need to be aware of it. But power plants pollute, and classically electrical power plants are either hydroelectric, which is a lot harder for me to illustrate with, so I'm gonna call that one better for now. And coal is how most growing economies develop power infrastructures, with coal-fired power plants. I'll discuss that in the next video. I'll make a mental note, coal power plants, how they work, and we'll just go over it in brief, and that'll be a random thing. You use coal, and when you burn coal, it produces a lot of air pollution, particularly sulfur compounds, sulfur oxides, and sulfates, and what have you, and those kind of compounds. And those are pollutive, and they create a lot of damage. And you can track that damages and can assign dollar values to it. And we're doing that just for the sake of quantitative definition. The fact is, the pollution makes life worse, and that's bad, and we should not do that. But in addition to that, we can actually track how it makes life worse. We can assign a dollar value to that, and then say that it makes life this much worse for people who aren't actually party to the exchange. They're for people who live near the power plant, or people who are downwind of the power plant. They are paying an extra cost and not getting anything in exchange for it, right? They're paying for those damages, but they're not actually getting any extra power for it. Nothing is being given to them. They're just paying out. That's an externality. And I mean, from a compassionate humanist perspective, that's a really cold way to look at it, right? We want to look at it as that's a bad thing. We should stop those, and that's all we really need as far as justifications go. But that's not enough for setting clear, defined policy, right? That's not enough if I want to program an AI that takes care of these things. I need to have numbers that I can put down. I need to be able to define how these things work. And so as part of that definition, we have the term externality, which is that not only is this bad qualitatively, but we can actually put numbers on it and say these numbers show a negative balance that has to be paid somewhere. These people are paying and they're not getting anything, and that's bad. Like, I consider my primary economic policy enemies to be like libertarians and objectivists, of the particularly bad variety. And I think that they would agree that if people are paying if people are paying and they're not receiving anything for it, that's bad. And a situation that forces that on people is bad and should be dealt with. Like, we need to not have that be the case. I'm not going to get into policy proposals on how to fix any of that, but that's just to define, that's what an externality is. And so the reason that the ends justify the means in the glib way leads to poor moral choices or immoral choices, is because it doesn't account for externalities. And those, you have to account for them because they're there and they're an important part of the accounting. So I think that's most of what I wanted to say about that. That got cut off. And then once this video finally uploads, I can link from that old one to this one, and everything will be hunky-dory, and I can say, sorry, I got cut off. Here's the new video. But yeah. So externalities are costs imposed on third parties to a transaction. They have to pay that they are not actually part of the transaction, so they don't get anything out of it. And on the sense of things being balanced, which is kind of the basis of a lot of that, is that things are balanced, then that's bad. Yeah. So I think that's what that was. You know what? Let's do it here. I've got plenty of time. It looks like traffic is kind of slow. So, on that topic, the way coal-fired power plants work, and actually nuclear works the same way, and CSP works the same way, concentrated solar power, as opposed to photovoltaic. We can get into those too. Briefly, the way that power is generated is by rotating magnetic fields past each other. And so that we're not turning this into a physics class, when you take magnets and run them past each other, current happens. There are whole entire degrees built around understanding why this works and what it means. But in brief, when magnetic fields run past conductors, then currents are induced in the conductors. That's called induction. If you have an induction stove, or an induction cooktop, that's how it works. It changes a magnetic field in the surface, and then the cookware that you're using has currents generated in it, and the resistance in the cookware is what makes the heat happen, or what generates the heat. I had an interesting hypothesis that my coworker and I came up with, that possibly resistance is the energy it takes to bump electrons out of their orbits. And so, I guess, the way to test that would be if conductance is relatable or corresponds with level on the periodic table. Because if elements that are lower on the periodic table are more conductive, then that would make sense, because their outer electrons are further away from their protons and are easier to knock out. Huh. I'll have to look into that. That's a good way to test that. I'll ask some people who know these things, and then we'll have an answer. Awesome. So, where were we? Power plants. So you want to spin this conductor. You want to move it past. You want to move a magnet past a conductor, and there's a lot of complicated design and engineering that goes into what exactly these are. But if it's a circle, then you can spin it, and you don't have to track it down or have it run back and forth or anything weird like that. So you spin it, and you spin this magnetic field past this conductor. It changes and then current happens, and then power happens, and that's how that works. So the issue with your source is, how do you get it to spin? And barring PV and wind, the way that you get your turbine to spin, the way that you get the magnet to spin past the conductor, is with water. And hydroelectric uses flowing water from a river. It's usually been dammed up to build extra pressure so that it pushes harder. But everything else, nuclear, concentrated solar power, CSP, coal, natural gas, all of these power plants use steam. And you burn the fuel source to heat up water until it becomes steam, and you push the steam, because that's a lot of extra pressure, through a turbine, and that spins your conductor, generates your electricity. So there's two major sources of pollution from this. This has gone into a weird, random place. Here, let me just go over my senior year of engineering school. There's two major sources of pollution from this. One is the obvious one, and that is your fuel source is pollutive. If you're using coal or oil, burning it releases carbon dioxide at the very least, and sulfur oxides and a number of other gross stuff depending on your input fuel and how clean it is. The other, and somewhat unexpected one, is in hot water, because you push the water in, heat it up, and push it through your turbine, and that cools it down because it pulls a lot of energy out of it. But it doesn't pull all the energy out of it. You still have hot water coming out of there, and it's got to go somewhere. The most common place to do this is into a nearby river, and that makes a wreck of the river, actually. It shows marked drops in dissolved oxygen for like miles downstream, and that screws up the ecosystem in the river, and it makes a giant mess. And externalities, because there's a cost associated with the damage you've done to the ecosystem, and whoever's paying for it isn't actually part of the process. So government regulation in terms of power companies and environment protection acts is a way of taking that cost and putting it on the power company, because they're the ones who are making the cost, so they should be paying for it. Usually this ends up in, brakes on a wet road, okay. Usually this ends up in raised prices, and then the customer is the one paying for the environmental damage, which is actually okay, I think. Personally, as someone who uses a lot of electricity, I think it's good that the cost is passed on to the consumer, because we're the ones making the demand. So ultimately it's the consumer's fault that this electricity is happening, and that's what's causing the damage. And then that way, that externality is paid for. It's no longer an externality, right? Because then you have, especially if you do it in the form of taxes, because then the government can step in and ameliorate the problem, and that is paid through those raised taxes. Cool, huh? Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe you hate that. Maybe you think that taxes are ultimately evil and we shouldn't have a government. I personally think that's incorrect, and that a government, although a nice little nexus of horrifying evils, is a thing that has to be there if you have more than, like, I don't know, 12 people. Yeah. Have I given my opinions on that? I think I have. That I think that if we had a perfectly benign, omniscient sentience, then that would be ideal. To have a perfectly benign and omniscient dictator would be actually ideal. That would be the best government. But that's not realistic. And that's like fundamentally unrealistic in kind of a perpetual motion machine level. Like that's that degree of unrealistic, is having that perfect dictator. And if it's not perfect, then it ends up making a bigger mess than if you just scrap the whole dictator idea. It ends up making a giant mess that ruins everybody's day, or at least almost everybody's day, and that's not right. That doesn't meet my utility function, so I call that wrong. And so as a compromise, we invest some power in a government, but we make the government accountable to the governed so that they can adjust it as it fails to meet their... And it will inevitably fail to meet your utility function. And so you invest some power in it that is at the behest of the people, so that the people can adjust the government to better meet their utility functions. And then over time, as lots of people are doing this, what we basically end up doing is crowdsourcing a dictator that doesn't look like a dictator. So it's kind of like letting the invisible hand of the market direct the government, but not actually like that, because it's not the market, it's the invisible hand of the people. Which is very similar, since it's still just all the people and all of the things they do, and it comes together. But at any rate, we invest some power in a government that ideally the people are able to take away from that government, because the government is also people, and as I think we all know, people are not infinitely benign or benevolent. So we give the massive people the ability to take power away from the government. This runs into further problems, and so I think when I pick this up in a little bit, I will carry on discussing what further problems that brings and how we've solved them. So coming up soon, constitutions and maybe the Magna Carta. Political theory is really interesting to me, so we'll probably, we'll go on about that for a little bit, and that should be fun. Be right back. And we're back. I don't know why I talk about these things, but I'm going to anyway. I don't have any kind of transition put there, and that might be like super harsh. So, I don't know, we'll see. But we're back, and I promised you constitutional republics and like the history of the state and that sort of thing, and how all that works. So where did we leave off? Oh yes. Investing the government with a small amount of power so that it can adjust for externalities and all that kind of stuff, and then directing the government with the will of the people so that the people can maneuver the government toward a more optimal place. The problem with this is that if you just let it do that by itself, in a very realistic application, what you get is people investing a lot of power into a demagogue who becomes an absolute dictator and ruins everything, because we've seen that dictators are a problem. So if we step back from that and idealize it a little bit so that we discount demagogues, we're still going to end up with the majority inevitably oppressing any minority that they don't like for any reason. And this is shown time and time again in our history, that as soon as there is a majority to rule on something, they'll start oppressing anybody that's not like them. So what we need to do, and this solves both problems, actually, the problem of the demagogue dictator and the problem of oppressing the minority. What we do is we set a little bit of power aside and limit what the ruler can do. And that's the point of a constitution, and it traces its history, that this concept traces its history back to, in at least Western Civ, the Magna Carta, which was 1215 and was a whole bunch of wealthy landowners making sure that they had very specific wealthy landowner rights that the king couldn't take away from them. And so the specific provisions of the Magna Carta are not really applicable in a modern world, but the idea that you can take the God-appointed absolute ruler and tell them, no, there are things you can't do, there are rules that are above you, is foundational, and it's super important. We set limits on the kind of power that this government can have, and that keeps the government from going out of control. It's not perfect, obviously, or I wouldn't have any problem with giving any power I wanted to the government, because then the checks would work. Checks don't work. It becomes somewhat oligarchic in nature, but it's way better. It's an improvement, and it's a ground we can use to improve on further. Without turning this into an actual lecture on constitutional theory and modern political science, which I'm not really that versed in, I think that's about where we would leave it. So we'll move on. And moving on, I happen to be, by nature, something of an apologist. And what that means is that I like to take a canon of work and sort of take it at face value, and then explain away any contradictions within that work using the given limits. So one of my first exposures to this, is this pointed actually at me? Kinda. So one of my first exposures to this is in Star Wars, and this is like the classic example for a young nerd. In Star Wars, in A New Hope, Han Solo makes the claim that the Millennium Falcon is so fast, it did the Kessel Run in under 12 parsecs. Which doesn't make any sense, because parsecs are a unit of speed, or a unit of distance, not speed or time. If the Kessel Run has to be done in a certain amount of, has a minimum amount of time for it to be run, then I guess doing that, but that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't tell us you're doing it fast. That's weird. Parsecs are distance, and they're like 3-point-something light years, I think. I recently rewatched it, and you can actually see that Sir Alec Guinness, actually knows that on some level. If you look at his face when Harrison Ford says that, there's a tiny lift in his eyebrow and a tiny curl in his cheek where you can see he's going, that doesn't make sense. And it's kind of funny. At any rate, the way that this has been explained is that the Kessel Run moves through a number of hyperspace dangers, and among them is a massive gravitational well. And the thing is, gravitational wells affect hyperspace, and by scooting fast, you can get closer to a point, or you can get closer into a well, or further into a well. So he shaved off a couple of parsecs by skating into this black hole cluster. So that's my first exposure to it. What brought this up recently, I got home and then spent an hour or more talking movies with my roommate, and less about the artistic qualities of the movie and more from a apologetics standpoint. Like, if we take the movie at face value, then how do we get rid of contradictions? Take The Matrix, and this is the key example that came up tonight. If we take The Matrix at face value, then you can't use humans as a fuel source if you're also using them to fuel them, right? Thermodynamics. Like, you can't do that. There isn't enough. That you just lose energy. That's terrible. What if, maybe I'll expand on, no, I'll just finish this thought. What if what we're actually looking at is not power banks? What if the machine's power source is elsewhere? What if this is just a massive expenditure that they've taken upon themselves for some strange reason? Back at the dawn of the machine age, when humans were first developing AI, they thought to themselves, well, I've read plays, I've read books, I know about robot revolutions, so what we'll do is put in some code so that the machines won't take over the world. Some sort of like Asimovian laws of robotics thing. And if we take it that way, then perhaps what the machines are doing is keeping humans alive because they believe that humans are important and need to be kept alive. So, from this perspective, virtually everything that the humans tell us about the world before, about the fall of humanity, about the nature of the robotic overlords is false. And it's based on their own interpretations of what they're seeing, and not based on complete evidence. In this case, there is baked deep into the AI's foundational source code, deep in their decision matrix, is this idea that humans have to be kept alive because they're important. Or humanity has to be kept alive. And so the robots decided that the best way to do that is to pack them all into this simulation that they can just reboot periodically when it gets out of hand. And then that way, all of the humans are kept safe and they can make themselves happy, and we don't have to worry about any of that. In particular, what this really invalidates is the histories presented in the Animatrix, but those are from Zion's files. And so those are what Zion thinks happened, and not any actual historical evidence. I might pick this up in a later video, or I might just leave it there and move on to other topics. Either way, it's been an awesome drive. You have a great night, and I will see you, or talk to you, and you guess you'll see me. Either way, next time.